Hi, good morning. Sorry to be a little bit late. I am Felicia Marcus, Chair of the Board, and today is Tuesday, September 4th at 9:33 a.m., and the meeting is now called to order. With me are, to my left, Vice Chair Stephen Moore, and to my right, Board Member Joaquin Esquivel. Ms. Obeck, will you introduce the staff that's assisting today?
Yes, good morning, Chair Marcus. With me on my left is Chief Counsel Michael Lawfer. On my right, my Chief Deputy Eric Oppenheimer. And assisting today is Janine Townsend, Clerk of the Board, and Courtney Tyler.
Thank you very much. For those of you who haven't been here, although I think virtually all of you have been here, the building's emergency procedures are as follows. Look for the exit nearest you, and if you hear a loud emergency sound, it's an emergency sound. Could be a drill, could be real. So just pick up your stuff and take your friends and proceed cautiously out of the building and down the stairs. If you can't use the stairs, wait around and people will magically appear in brightly colored vests or one of us will take you to a protected area, and there's one or two on every floor. We meet near the corner, we gather near the corner of 10th and J, so if you want to wait with us for the all clear, join us there. The meeting is being webcast and recorded, so please be sure to speak into the microphone when you come on up. And importantly, or most important, I hate the word importantly, silence your sound-making devices in whichever way you prefer. With that, we're on to the public forum. And that's when anyone who wants to speak to us on something that's not on the agenda can speak to us, but there's nobody who wants to speak to us on anything that's not on the agenda today. Okay, at least not in public forum. All right, great.
Not on a Tuesday after a 3-day weekend.
That's right, and after.
Oh, there is public.
Do you? Ms. Seaton, always happy to hear from you. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. Good morning, and then I'll fill out a card, I promise. I just
and restate your name for the
Phoebe Seaton, Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability. I just got off the phone with a colleague who's working in Tulare, and I promised him I'd bring this up. We're having a community, thankfully he has safe drinking water, is on a wholesale agreement with the city of Tulare, and they're looking at, in part because of the wholesale agreement, in large part because of the wholesale agreement, the mutual water system that still runs the system is increasing fees for the second time now up to $70, and it was 40, now it was 50, now it's 70. It's creating a lot of strife. We've been working with excellent staff at the State Water Board to try to address this, to try and buffer and mitigate some of the impacts of this as we're working as quickly as we can to get a full consolidation agreement in place. But we might be coming back to you for kind of help on this and other issues because we're seeing it as a bit of a pattern in the context of wholesale agreements. That's it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. I'll love to hear more about that later on. And glad you're already working with our staff because my to-do then is already done, but happy to talk to you about it myself too. All right. Meeting minutes from August 21st and 22nd. Do I have a motion?
Move to adopt.
I'll second it. I'll just ask the clerk to review for some spell check errors, I think, but without anything specific, just do a proofread. And with that, I'll second.
All right, any discussion? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, carries. Next, current hydrologic conditions. Hot and dry?
Usually the case around Labor Day.
Good morning. My name is Alessia Siglari. I'm an engineer with the Division of Water Rights, and here with me is engineer Vadim Damchak. We are going to present today item number 2, hydrology update for the Bay Delta watershed. And the presentation is going to include the precipitation update, current major reservoir condition, drought update, and temperature and precipitation forecast. So starting with Northern Sierra precipitation, the 8th station index for August 29, 2018 shows Northern Sierra at 80% of historical average for this date. And the dark blue line shows current daily precipitation. It is at 40.9 inches. Central Sierra is at 75% of historical average for this date, with current daily precipitation of 29.7 inches. Southern Sierra is at 63% of average, with current daily precipitation of 17.7 inches. And there's no changes for Northern Sierra and Southern Sierra from last update. Before to talk about current reservoir condition, I want to answer the question that was asked during last month meeting, and about the Sacramento and the San Joaquin Valley water year type. For both forecasts, both have been forecast to be below normal. About reservoir conditions, reservoirs look in good shape because of carryover from previous year, and they are mostly at or above average, with only some of them below average, and they are Trinity Lake, Lake Shasta, Lake Oroville, Folsom Lake, and Pine Flat Reservoir. And there's no significant changes from last update. Cachuma is at 31% of capacity and 41% of average, with a 4% changes from last month. It was 35% of capacity and 45% of average. And Diamond Valley Lake is at 88% of capacity, with no changes from last month. Drought condition, see Southern California between moderate and exceptional drought, and extreme drought, and Northern and Central California at abnormally dry to moderate drought. And there's a 47% of the area of the state that is between D1 and D4, which is moderate to exceptional drought. And this is a 3% increase from last update. Temperature probability for the 8 to 14-day outlook is at above normal, and there's an increase. It was between, the maximum was between 50 and 60%, and now we have an area in Southern California that is between 60 and 70%. Precipitation probability for the 8-14-day outlook, as California, mostly a normal probability, and Southern California, slightly above normal. Please, I conclude the update. We are here to answer your questions.
Great. Any questions?
Oh, I just think it's interesting this year, if you think of the character of and how it feels around the state, if you've traveled recently, it feels kind of dry. And if you look at the Sierra numbers, you know, the average north is 50 inches a year, central is 40, and Tulare and southern is 30. It's a 50-40-30. This year we went 40-30-20, or, you know, everything was about 10 inches down. Tulare a little bit more. So it's interesting to see that we're in a below normal water year type, as you mentioned. I appreciate that. And yet there's a feeling it's quite dry, and the drought indicators show dryness throughout the state. And the deficit wasn't overly dramatic. It was about 10 inches down, but you can see what a dramatic effect it has on how it feels, the wildfire risk, and the wildfires we're experiencing, and but that the water supply story is still holding pretty true, except for some localized exceptions like Santa Barbara. But it's worth reflecting on when we're down on precipitation to below normal. It still has a pretty demonstrable impact on how things feel and the character, you know, of our state. And but we can withstand it for the year. We have to look ahead and continue our conservation efforts and continue our commitment toward water efficiency.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think it's, and I agree with the board member. I think it's particularly important to remember and keep an eye on that efficiency and that conservation, because that little corner of California that we saw in extreme drought is actually part of a much larger, the Colorado River Basin that is in exceptional drought. If we pulled up the current drought monitor for the entire Colorado River Basin, it is, bright red at this point.
And flashing, probably.
And, yeah, very, very much flashing with mead and storage considerations there on the river system in general. There's a lot of stress on the system, not just within our borders, but then these watersheds, particularly the Colorado, that we depend on. So anyway, thank you.
Thanks and welcome. Item number 3, update on urban water conservation. Ms. Hart? Did you guys coordinate this morning? Yes, we did. It's raindrops, right? Water drops? You can never have too many. I feel a little left out. I almost wore blue polka dots. That would have been funny.
Next time.
Next time, right. Put me on that email chain.
Yelena Hartman, Senior Scientist in your Office of Research Planning and Performance. We can do one slide. In July 2018, the water use was down 13.6% compared to the same month in 2013. Given how hot and dry it is and what the character of the state is, this is a good number. I was actually surprised, and this item will summarize the key points from the urban water conservation for the month of July.
Thank you for the cover slide. I'm homesick now.
That's where people did great. So
I don't know why I get so homesick in downtown LA as opposed to in the Santa Monica Mountains or at the beach. When I drive down through there, that's when I get emotional about missing LA. I don't know why. It's not my favorite part of LA. Anyway, so thank you.
makes a good cover slide. So on this slide, we capture all of our data and provide a large context for the statewide urban water production. The blue shaded area is volume that was used in 2013 that was used as a baseline to compare water use in subsequent years when we had emergency drought conservation. The emergency drought conservation expired last year, so the heavy blue line, that's 2018, are tentative results because reporting since the expiration of the emergency regulation has been voluntary. So we have pretty good participation, but we don't have complete reports. So see this line as preliminary result and how it compares to 2013. When this presentation summarizes comparison to 2013, we're really looking only at the suppliers that reported this year. We're not going to be making difference with the ones that are not reporting this year. And what we see is that first, the use peaks in months of July and August. So we are really at the hottest and driest, and this is where people are compelled to use most. And what we see is that in July 2018, we're well below 2013. The tentative water production is around 93 billion gallons. With the missing suppliers, if we estimate what that volume would be, we're probably close to what the use was last year. That's the dark gray line on this chart. And so with the 30 billion gallons saved in July 2018 and previous months of this year, we're cumulatively at about 15% savings for the year, which is pretty good given that this is all based on voluntary effort. There is no requirement to reduce the use or to use it at an efficient
Right, and we're
standard
one more
right now.
year from the depth of the drought, so the drought memory is holding.
And some habits are sticking. So cumulatively this year, we've saved over 173 billion gallons, and that's good. This month for July 2018, it's 30 billion gallons savings for the suppliers that reported this month. This month is, in this report, July 2018, and the orange slice shows that the non-reporting suppliers are approximately 11% of the 409 urban water suppliers that were reporting under the emergency drought water conservation. And the rest of the slices show the level of water savings compared to 2013. So we see that the majority of suppliers reported savings for July 2018. There are 18 suppliers that reported use equal to or greater than 2013, but more than a half reported savings that are above 10%.
That's great.
Which is remarkable, given that July was actually the hottest July on record for the state of California. So we've had some hot Julys on record, and 2013 itself was above average. This chart summarizes departure from the 20th century average July monthly temperature. And so the red bars that go above zero are how many degrees on average it was warmer for that year in July, and the blue bars going below show how much it was cooler. And so we are 5 degrees above the average for the month of July this year. Given that the water use goes up with the hot temperatures, savings of 13.6% is actually surprising and remarkable.
Thank you. It's helpful. I wanted to know what you thought about it. I always react with what could possibly go wrong or the most negative. So that's actually quite helpful.
In early July, with the heat waves in the Southern California and people in Los Angeles baking at 10s and 20 degrees above average, I thought, well, July is going to be a hard report to ingest. So when I saw that savings are 13.6%, I was actually really surprised. And I think it's a testament to people remembering, memory is still alive, it feels dry, and we also have some permanent measures in place that I think all worked together towards this result. Given the conditions, we can now look at the residential use. The slide summarizes on the bottom left, the bars show the statewide average residential gallons per person per day use. In 2018, it's 118 gallons. It's slightly better than last year. Margin of error, I mean, we could say it's similar to last year, but it was hotter this year. And it's substantially lower than what the use was in 2013. On the right-hand side, we have RGPCD summarized by hydrologic region. So these are averages by the hydrologic region. And we see that along the coasts, we are at 86, 88, and then 104 in southern coast. That's where it was hottest and where the use was greater. The highest use was, interestingly enough, in the Colorado River. It's 201. But when we compare it to the use, which is shown in the dark blue circle behind, which was 242 in 2013, we see that there is also change and significant decrease in urban water production compared to a few years back.
Yeah, there are a lot of factors that play into it, but thank you for the bubble. I love bubble charts, so thank you. It just gives you the sense of perspective when people focus just on the percentages. They're not realizing the different, both needs and actions, because in those coastal areas are also more water stressed at times too. Colorado River, even though it's largely for ag, you have the most senior water rights on the Colorado River, and it's really hot. So it's it's just interesting. Then if you start looking at population numbers, it's another overlay. It's interesting too.
Well, yes, the population numbers are important. This list actually summarizes more as an example what's possible, and a lot of different factors go into this, but it summarizes the July communities that used below 55 gallons per person per day, both indoor and outdoors. And the reason we're highlighting this number, it's going to be the indoor water use standard, and then we would add outdoor and other parts to calculate the total budget for a supplier. But it is possible, we know for a majority of these places, there's a different mix that went into it, but it is possible to have this use even in a month that's as hot as July.
And not all of them Well, San Francisco has lawns too, but smaller lots, but not a lot of these are places us all having visited some of them have lawns. They're just not as bright green.
And to be fair, talking about and thinking about lawns and what's there in longer term, these communities started with relatively low water use in 2013. So it's not like these communities are now below 55 in July and they started at, 3 or 4 times that amount. But over the years, they've implemented efficiency measures. They maybe don't have lawns. They have different type of landscaping. So it really is a mix of things. Not going deep, really just to highlight these as what is possible. And we have quite a bit going on in terms of water conservation and efficiency legislation. In terms of reporting urban water use, we're continuing to encourage reporting. We're working with suppliers that are not reporting, if they have new people reporting or new staff, to help them along to bridge and transition into reporting. The big pieces related to the water efficiency legislation is that in mid-August, Department of Water Resources, with input from the State Water Board, released a report which is making conservation in California way of life primer of 2018 legislation of water conservation and drought planning. So that report is out and written comments are requested by September 14th. To also discuss and hear input from stakeholders, Department of Water Resources also with the State Water Board is holding listening sessions. The first one is tomorrow. It's going to be in Sacramento, and then at the end of the week in Los Angeles, and then in Fresno for next week. In addition to that, we are continuing work on water loss control, and there is a stakeholder workshop scheduled for Los Angeles on September 17th. So information and details about these can be accessed from our water conservation portal. Some of the links point to the Department of Water Resources when it's related to conservation legislation, stakeholder listening sessions, and water loss control is on our website. And we also have all the data that we presented today posted and available.
Great. Thank you, as always, for the great work. Okay. Item number 4. Thank you.
Shall I begin?
Yes.
Good morning, Chair Marcus, members of the board. I'm Stacy Gillespie from the Office of Chief Counsel. I'm presenting on item 4. So before you on item 4 is a procedural order that, if adopted, would allow the board more time to review the petition filed by AGWA and Environmental Law Foundation on the WDRs issued by the Central Valley Regional Board to dairies in 2013. Unless the board adopts the proposed order, there is a current deadline to act on the petition in 2 weeks, on September 17th, at which time the petition would be deemed denied if not acted upon at that time. So adopting the proposed order wouldn't commit the board to any certain type of action. What it would do is provide more time for the board to decide what to do on the petition after the September deadline. Because this item involves an order that was issued in 2013, I wanted to take a moment to explain what's happened between now and then on the petition.
That was going to be my question.
So the petitioners did timely file the petition in 2013, and for the first couple of years in the Office of Chief Counsel and Division of Water Quality, we didn't have sufficient resources to actively tend to it for the first couple of years. And then in December 2015, petitioners requested that its petition be put in abeyance, where it stayed for another 2 years until petitioners requested that it be removed from abeyance last December in 2017. So at that point in time, the petition was reactivated, and the Central Valley Regional Board submitted the administrative record, submitted a response to the petition, and two interested parties, one Dairy Cares and California Farm Bureau, also submitted a written response to the petition. And at this time, Division of Water Quality and Office of Chief Counsel are actively taking a hard look at the issues. We expect to be able to provide board member briefings within a month's time from now.
You're answering all my questions. Great.
Excellent. So that's the status on the underlying petition. With regard to the order before you today, the own motion review order, we did receive two comments last week, one from petitioners and one from Dairy Cares, and both are supportive of the board adopting the proposed order. I would add that petitioners additionally urge that on the board's own motion review, it act expeditiously, given this matters implicating a 2013 order. So with that, I'd ask if there are any questions from the board.
And we have one speaker card.
Just to remind folks, so the order was adopted in 2013. Is it on some kind of a cycle of being reissued?
It will be on a cycle of being reissued. I'm not aware of what the current status is of that. I know that it's under a time schedule, and the discharges are actively being responsive to the time schedule.
And I think the important thing to keep in mind with this particular underlying order, it is not an NPDES permit, so it does not have the 5-year cycle that an NPDES permit would.
All right, let's hear from Speaker Phoebe Seaton from the Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability.
Thank you. Good morning again. I think I asked for 2 minutes. I don't think I'll need 2 minutes. Comments just align with our written comments. We definitely do not oppose the proposed order, but do ask that you act expeditiously, quickly. As we speak, dairies are continuing to contaminate the groundwater and continues to be an urgent matter. So hope that we can resolve a lot of the questions and concerns we raised in the underlying petition through this order. And since I have so much time, I agree with you on downtown LA. I just think there's just so much humanity and potential. You don't actually have to talk to anybody, but you get to see it and feel it. And that's it.
Yeah, Mark's here. He missed the whole conversation about it earlier. All right. The expeditious part, I feel strongly about. And I also think the issue of this permit has come up a number of times in the context of other issues that we've dealt with in this past year. So I think it's probably the neural nets are set, and I'm looking forward to those briefings. So if you can figure out if you can even figure out how to set mine a little earlier, that would be, just in case I go back into hearing tunnel, where that's all I am is sitting here, or sitting there. So it would be nice to get that on my calendar sooner than later,
Excellent.
Even if you're not quite ready.
Okay.
Thank you. All right. We need to make a motion on our own motion. Is there one?
I move adoption of staff recommendation.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, there you go. Thank you very much. Thanks for answering all my questions in advance. All right. Item number 5. I'm jumpy about getting the number right because of that time I got them wrong over and over. It was like a Monty Python routine. Item number 5. There is no number 9. I checked that. I'm sort of sad there's no number 9. And the agenda doesn't go to 11 either. My agenda goes to 11. Your agenda goes to 11. Exactly. I have to say this is a merciful agenda after the last month, so I appreciate the gods for having that be the case. Hi.
Hi, good morning, Chair Marcus and members of the board. I'm Catherine Fike. I am the Senior Environmental Scientist in the Ocean Standards Unit here at the State Water Board. Today we are going to be presenting on the interim mitigation requirements of the once-through cooling policy and the use of interim mitigation funds. To my right is Julie Johnson, the lead staff on the once-through cooling policy here at the Water Boards. To her right is Tova Handelman, the Marine Protected Areas Manager at the Ocean Protection Council, and to her right is Mary Small, the Deputy Executive Director at the Coastal Conservancy. Julie's going to be starting us off with some background on the interim mitigation requirements and the funds received so far, and then both Mary and Tova will be speaking on how the funds will be used.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Morning.
Owners and operators of power plants under the statewide water quality control policy on the use of coastal and estuarine waters for power plant cooling, hereon referred to as the once-through cooling policy or the policy, are required to implement measures to mitigate interim impingement and entrainment impacts resulting from their cooling water intake structures. The interim mitigation period commenced on October 1st, 2015, and continues up until a power plant is in full compliance with the policy. The policy provides 3 options for demonstrating compliance with the interim mitigation requirements. Most power plant owners and operators elected to comply by providing funding to the Coastal Conservancy and the Ocean Protection Council to fund appropriate mitigation projects. In accordance with the Memorandum of Understanding between the State Water Board, the Ocean Protection Council, and the Coastal Conservancy regarding the acceptance and use of interim mitigation funds, $5.4 million per annual period are provided to the Ocean Protection Council for mitigation of impacts in state marine protected areas. The Coastal Conservancy receives all funds above $5.4 million, including funds directly from Mandalay and Ormond Beach generating stations for wetland restoration around Oxnard, California. So the table on this slide shows the total amount of funds for the 2 operating periods that have been completed since October 1st of 2015, and the amount of funds managed by the Ocean Protection Council and the Coastal Conservancy each year. The interim mitigation payments from the power plant owners and operators totaled just over $6.9 million for October 2015 to September 2016, and just over $7.2 million for the October 2016 to September 2017 period.
Quick question.
Yes.
Sorry, not to interrupt, but when it comes to this table, if we were to sort of project out into the coming years, those totals, what might they look like? Do we roughly know?
Good question. So for approximately the next 7 years, we'll see about the same amount of money. So somewhere between $6 million and $7 million. In 2015, that's when Diablo Canyon is currently scheduled to retire, and that's where we'll see the biggest drop-off. 2025.
2025, yeah.
Apologies.
That's okay.
Yeah, but that's when
record.
yeah, that's when we'll see the biggest decrease in funds. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. That's helpful.
No problem. Let's see. So. The Coastal Conservancy received approximately $1.5 million during the first period and approximately $1.8 million during the second period. So, as you can see in the table, there is an increase in total funds from the first to the second period. Each year, the total amount of interim mitigation funds will vary due to variables such as power plants retiring or repowering with new technology, increases or decreases in the volume of ocean water that is used at each plant, and also from the 3% escalator that is applied to the entrainment rate in the interim mitigation payment calculation that accounts for inflation. So interim mitigation payments will cease when all power plants under the policy have come into compliance, and interim mitigation payments are no longer required. At this time, all power plants under the policy are scheduled to be in compliance between 2018 and 2029. And with that, please welcome Mary Small to present on how the Coastal Conservancy will be distributing their portion of the funds.
Great, thank you, and good morning.
Morning.
Let's see if I can do 2 things at once. Apparently not. Okay. I'm pleased to provide this update, I will just say it's been great to work with your staff and OPC on this project. As you probably know, the Coastal Conservancy is a state agency, and we were created as the non-regulatory coastal agency to implement projects along the coast. Oops, now I jumped ahead. So as was mentioned, there are two allocations of these interim funds coming to the Coastal Conservancy. The first are the funds from the Ormond Beach and Mandalay Bay power plants. And we are proposing to use those funds to complete the EIR for the wetland restoration at Ormond Beach wetlands. And this is an overview of that project area, and you can see the Ormond Beach Power Station is literally right in the middle of it. This slide gives you a little bit of the regional context with both the Mandalay Bay and the Ormond Beach power plant. Zooming in, the Ormond Beach Wetland Restoration Project is a partnership between the City of Oxnard, the Nature Conservancy, and the Coastal Conservancy. Collectively, we own about 630 acres, which is contiguous with about 2,000 acres of wetland at Point Mugu. This area has long been identified as a regional priority for wetland restoration. It's one of the only places in Southern California where the highway and the railroad don't come right along the coast. So there's an opportunity to restore contiguous habitat from the ocean through the transition zones up into the upland. Historically, the coast of Ventura was a series of coastal lagoon systems. So the vision is to try and restore some of that ecological function. The Coastal Conservancy, Oxnard, and the Nature Conservancy have been working on a restoration and public access plan for that 630 acres, developing alternatives, working with a science advisory committee and a public stakeholder group. That process is just wrapping up this year with to select a preferred alternative. And so the next step to move the project forward would be to complete an environmental impact report. And we are hoping that the EIR and the permitting and final design would take about 2 to 3 years. So then jumping to the remainder of the funds, we are proposing that we would use the partnership of the Southern California Wetland Recovery Project and its work plan to identify priority projects in the Southern California Bight for the remainder of the funds. And just as a reminder, the Southern California Wetland Recovery Project is a partnership of 18 state and federal agencies. It includes staff from the state board, as well as the 3 regional boards in Southern California. And it was created about 20 years ago to accelerate and coordinate wetland restoration in Southern California. For the past 4 years, the real focus of the Wetland Recovery Project has been updating a regional strategy to think about wetland restoration in a period of climate change and to come up with really specific scientific objectives to guide wetland restoration, habitat conservation into the future. That project, that strategy update is just wrapping up, and the directors group of the Wetland Recovery Project will consider adopting it in October. Assuming that that goes forward, they will also issue a call for projects for the work plan, which is an annual solicitation that the Recovery Project does that is then vetted by all of the agency staff, and then that comes up with a list of priority projects in the region. This is the current list of, the current dots of the Wetland Recovery Project work plan projects. And if I didn't mention it, the Wetland Recovery Project works from Point Conception to the border of Mexico. So currently there are 53 projects on the work plan, but again, that will be updated, and the project's proposals will be reviewed in the context of the regional strategy. The work plan has never been a guarantee of funding, but just a process for interagency coordination and agreement on the priorities within the region. So this just shows the proposed schedule. We're hoping that the regional strategy will be adopted in October and the work plan released, and that we will have an updated work plan in March. And then pursuant to the MOU, we would come to agreement with your staff and OPC about which projects from that list are appropriate for the once through cooling funding.
So the funding goes for projects as well as the planning?
Yeah, exactly.
Nice to see those dots all the way up, because so often the funding for wetland projects are down near the bottom.
Yeah.
That's great.
How far out will you consider your projects insofar as your current selection? Will you be looking at sort of a 5-year funding horizon, or 10-year, the entire plan? How will you guys sort of parse out?
Yeah, I think once we have the updated work plan, there's a set of choices that we can make with your staff, and I think we welcome direction. You know, we find that the planning, environmental review, and permitting piece of wetland projects, like that takes the longest and is often the hardest to fund. The actual construction doesn't take that long, but I think there's a question of whether we commit the funds to a few projects and really try and make sure we get them all the way done, or whether we want to pick projects throughout the region and move them along. And I don't have an opinion about that yet.
Thank you.
Sure.
Classic dilemma. That's one of those both are true kind of problems.
Right.
But really true, if you look at the requirements of things like Prop 1 or that sort, you know, there's a focus on implementing projects, but there's a presumption that there's shovel-ready projects ready to go, and there's a lot of planning and permitting and that must precede it, and it costs a lot, you know, at least 20% of the overall project cost.
And while this might be, you know, best left maybe for another discussion, you know, I think it is important to recognize our role in that permitting process and try to find out how we can better sort of dovetail into existing conversations or whatever it is that we necessarily need or could sort of tee off from, if you will, in trying to speed up how we permit them or how we sort of view them within our own authorities. So.
Thanks for pointing that out, because that's really true. And I know that in the Bay Area, because certainly that's where most of my experience is, and I'm struck by the similarities of the Southern California Wetland Recovery Project and efforts in the Bay Area restoration, where we all taxed ourselves $12 a parcel to create a restoration fund. And now there's a permitting agency forum that's gathered to deal with what Board Member Esquivel mentioned, which is that coordination of permitting. Because after all, these restoration projects are attaining goals that we have as central to our mission in water resources. And so it's a classic dilemma, as you say, you know, getting in our own way potentially, unless we really do a good job of coordinating with other agencies and in a timely manner to create efficiencies in the overall permitting aspect.
And when it comes to these funds, I feel they're a bit unexpected insofar as, you know, when they were first proposed, it wasn't certain what the power plants were going to necessarily do, or the owners and operators, and they've elected to pay the interim funding amounts. And so, you know, how we maximize then this sort of block of dollars, particularly because we do know that there's a sunset for them. There's only a certain period of years. There is some certainty in those amounts. You know, how do we get creative and ensure that we're using those funds to their maximum sort of purpose, I think is, you know, important. So, and I know there's still a lot of thinking around that, and so I look forward to certainly our staff having that conversation with your agencies and look forward to the discussion in general. So.
That's great, and the leadership in the Coastal Recovery Project is evident. You know, it's so helpful to have the standardization of methodologies for determining project success, and doing so in a way that's, you know, transparent but really attainable, you know, and reasonable. That we don't need to get too bogged down in perfect science to move forward on getting implementation that the public can enjoy as soon as possible, and that we can get benefits to marine protected areas and the overall ecosystem connectivity as soon as possible. And so really want to you know, salute the efforts to coordinate across that huge geographic area for a standardized set of, you know, project evaluation criteria and selection criteria and so forth, so that you know, it's going to be very, and taking into account climate change, of course, that this is a dynamic landscape, and the performance objectives that we select we're not going to hit them every time, and we need to be prepared to manage adaptively and reasonably. As long as we do so in an open manner, I think we'll be in great shape.
Great.
Great.
On to OPC.
Yes, thank you. Good morning. My name is Tova Handelman. I'm the Marine Protected Area Program Manager at the Ocean Protection Council. I'd just like to echo Mary's sentiments that it's been a real pleasure to work with both the Conservancy and your staff. We've developed a really great partnership through this program. So I'm looking forward now to giving you a brief overview of the programs that the OPC has already funded and what's to come from the program. So through discussions with the state water boards and the MPA statewide leadership team, as well as with input from many stakeholders, and also with approval from our council, OPC has developed 4 program priorities that guide how the funds could be spent to achieve the goals of the policy to increase marine life associated with marine protected areas in California. In order for MPAs to accrue their maximum ecological benefits, including those that offset once-through cooling impacts, MPA regulations need to be enforced, and ocean users also need to be educated about those regulations in order to improve compliance. Also, funding research and monitoring projects will help us understand how our MPA network may be offsetting once-through cooling impacts and what more is needed. And the funds will also be allocated to restoration projects in addition to the restoration projects that the Coastal Conservancy just mentioned. All 4 categories complement each other to ensure a well-rounded approach to mitigate the impacts of once-through cooling and increase marine life associated with MPAs. OPC can distribute its funds to projects in these categories in 2 ways: through a competitive award program that I'll talk about in just a moment, and also through interagency contracts or other unsolicited projects as needed. Just to note that all projects, whether established through the competitive award program or otherwise, will be evaluated by the same criteria within each of their categories, and they will be subject to review and approval by the Ocean Protection Council. A minimum of a 10-day public comment period will be made available prior to the council meeting so that the public can review the recommended projects. So now I'd like to take a moment to highlight 3 projects that have already been approved by the Ocean Protection Council. So we know that recurring poaching of marine life in MPAs decreases marine populations, of course, and their reproductive output. And therefore can affect an ecosystem's ability to recover from or mitigate the negative impacts such as those caused by once-through cooling. So at the July 25th Ocean Protection Council meeting, the council allocated $3 million over 3 years to the California Department of Fish and Wildlife Law Enforcement Division to increase patrols in the MPA network statewide to issue violations if they occur and to deter them from occurring again. The department will also hold...
This one was at the top of my list.
Oh, good.
Considering that linkage between what we're losing and
yes,
the best place to generate more fish.
Yes,
yeah,
certainly. And marine life in general, beyond fish, of course. So in addition to increasing patrols, the department will also hold 4 training seminars for law enforcement personnel to review the new and existing MPA regulations and provide guidance on how to best report the contacts and citations in a new statewide database. These funds will also be used to provide critical funding for boat maintenance needed to sustain these efforts, to increase the patrol hours, and to ensure that all equipment is in good working order. And finally, these funds will allow the Marine Enforcement Division to outfit 6 offshore vessels with wireless connectivity, which is crucial for reporting and will fill a current need in enforcement efficiency. The department's past law enforcement efforts indicate that while an enhanced enforcement detail focused on one protected area reduces violations in that area, violations increase in other regions not receiving the same attention. So this project addresses this need for consistent enforcement efforts statewide, as a statewide application is most successful in reducing violations overall. Studies of MPAs worldwide indicate that marine life increases when violations decrease, and the reporting made possible through the vessel's wireless connectivity will not only help us understand how well these efforts are working to reduce violations, but will also be used in conjunction with monitoring data to ensure that it's adhering to the policy's goal of increasing marine life.
I will say I did have a little question around the expenditure of these funds, only because these are sort of systemic needs that the department needs. They need more access to resources, and sort of a temporary 3-year boost in it was sort of concerned about just the sort of longevity then of those funds within, if it's just a kind of a temporary sort of support for what is a real constant need, is it not maybe sort of a Band-Aid? But understanding a little more where the dollars will be going, it's to sort of infrastructure, basic infrastructure that will carry on through the years, through the sort of timeline of the funding, the 3 years here. I think it's dollars well spent, and again, it's to sort of very much upgrade the sort of capacity in general, and not necessarily just a temporary injection of dollars that then we'll see staff wane then after that period and not really get the benefit. But updating the technology, using the dollars again for real sort of base needs, I think is wise, and I think it's great. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, all of the projects that you'll see here have a common thread of longevity beyond the funding, spending timeline. That's something that we wanted to make sure, especially at the start of this program, that we continue, and then as funds continue through the years of this program, that these agencies or other organizations that we will be providing funds for can reapply for funds after the 3 years and see what their budgets are at that time as well. So thank you for that. Okay, the next project it regards outreach and education, which is necessary to complement the efforts to establish and maintain compliance with MPA regulations. Simply put, people need to know the rules in order to comply with them. And when compliance increases, violations decrease, and thus gives MPAs the chance to recover and increase marine life. So this project allocates $1.2 million to the Department of Parks and Recreation to bolster the MPA messaging in their education programs in 7 park districts until 2021. 33% of the state's MPA network is co-located with California state parks, which provides the opportunity to teach thousands of visitors from across the state and country about marine protected areas and how to understand and comply with their regulations. So in addition to campfire programs focused on MPAs and participation in the popular citizen science program MPA Watch, the funding for this project will facilitate several necessary deliverables that will fill current gaps and further strengthen a statewide approach to educate the public about the MPA network. One goal from this project is to expand the Parks Online Resources for Teachers and Students program, also known as PORTS, to include additional MPA messaging and to increase student participation from kindergarten through 12th grade by 40%. The program connects students in their classrooms from across the state to a park ranger in an MPA live through Skype, and sometimes with a waterproof camera dropped off the side of a kayak to actually see what lives underwater in the MPAs, and that makes for a truly impactful lesson. This project will also fund the much-needed translation of public educational materials, such as brochures and flyers, posters, etc., into Spanish and Asian languages, to reach audiences that may not be receiving important information about MPAs currently. And finally, these funds will allow the Department of Parks and Recreation to hire a state park interpreter dedicated to the production of this new MPA content and programming, which fills a critical need identified by the MPA statewide leadership team. Surveys administered by the Department of Parks and Recreation before and after programs indicate that their educational models work to improve understanding of what behavior is and is not allowed in state parks. So we expect that the MPA messaging of these projects will reach over 500,000 people throughout the course of this project, which will prepare visitors of all ages to appropriately comply with MPA regulations. We will compare the pre and post program surveys collected throughout this project with the Department of Fish and Wildlife's violation reports to determine that visitor compliance is increasing.
Before you move on,
Yeah.
one thing I don't know a lot of the details, but one thing I was struck by with the important marine protection area program is the role of Native Californians, the First Nation, and their traditional ecological knowledge, and also their what they would consider their sustainable harvest approaches, and their role in this, and in terms of enforcement and outreach and education. It's not really the same as commercial fishers and recreational. And yet I'm struggling to explain, where do they fit in all of this? Have you had some experience working with Native
Absolutely.
tribes, and how would you answer that?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for bringing that up. So in all of our work programs for all of these projects that we'll be funding, we make sure to include a statement that says that if the project has an effect on or includes Native tribes, that they must work into their work plan a consultation period in order to discuss with the Native tribes that are either affected or should be involved in the messaging, for example, for outreach and education programs. So, and as I get into now the competitive award program at the end of this presentation, the award guidelines include that as well. And, Native tribes are certainly welcome to apply for these funds to do projects that they would like to do as well. So yes, they're certainly incorporated into all aspects of these projects as needed, of course. Yeah. Okay. So for research and monitoring, OPC has been facilitating the statewide MPA monitoring program since 2008, when it allocated $4 million for each of the South Central, North Central, and North MPA regions to collect baseline data that establish the conditions present at or near the time of MPA implementation. Data were collected both inside MPAs and at areas with similar conditions outside of MPAs. And this approach allowed for trend monitoring over time to determine potential ecological effects of removing or reducing fishing in MPAs. These funds were administered by California Sea Grant through a competitive process, and in total, 39 projects were awarded. All of these projects made recommendations for long-term monitoring, including the design, metric, method, and program components. And one of the key recommendations across the regions was to establish a funding mechanism that could support multi-year monitoring efforts. The MPA statewide leadership team also identified developing and implementing a statewide long-term monitoring plan as a high priority need to ensure the MPA network is successful at increasing marine life, and is finalizing the MPA monitoring program action plan to address these needs. So at its July meeting, the Ocean Protection Council approved $9.9 million in total to fund phase 2 of this long-term monitoring program. The program is funded by Proposition 84, general funds, and $4.5 million from the Once Through Cooling program. This project will continue OPC's support for the long-term success of California's MPA network, and will ensure that the state is prepared for the 2022 management review. The MPA monitoring program has created a cross-disciplinary network of partners inside and outside of government that are invested in monitoring the effectiveness of the state's MPA network. And we are confident that these funds will result in useful data and analyses, as the investments made for phase 1 have produced critical data that have informed adaptive management so far. If the MPA Monitoring Action Plan is approved by the Council in October, a request for qualifications will be released this fall. California Sea Grant will once again bring their scientific expertise to partner with OPC and the Department of Fish and Wildlife to conduct a competitive scientific grant review process. And the scientific review panel, which will include OPC staff and other state agency representatives, will make recommendations to fund projects that best meet the action plan requirements and the goals of the once through cooling policy. OPC staff will present these projects to the Council for consideration and final approval in February 2019.
Who do you imagine will be the applicants for such projects, for monitoring projects?
Yeah, we certainly expect that, you know, the usual suspects of our regular partners in the UCs and CSU systems will apply for this, but of course open to Native tribes, other, you know, organizations who are doing similar monitoring.
So it could be connected to existing regional monitoring programs.
Exactly, yeah. Okay, and finally for restoration, the Ocean Science Trust convened a working group of the OPC Science Advisory Team to scientifically define the spatial extent of once through cooling impacts and to help understand what the geographic region of the facility is. The working group released their report in June, and the report determined that because oceanographic currents connect locations both inside and outside of MPAs, the harmful effects of once through cooling extends 100 kilometers north and south from a power plant's intake pipe. And thus the report defines the areas impacted as the entirety of state waters, which is 3 nautical miles from the coastline, from San Diego to Big Sur near Lucia, and that includes the waters around the Channel Islands as well. So to be eligible to receive funding, all projects must be focused within this region. If the project takes place outside of this region, like for a statewide application, for example, then the applicant must demonstrate how the projected outcomes are connected to the geographic region. Projects that are focused solely outside the geographic region of the facility are ineligible. I'd like to note that the working group also created a scientific framework to evaluate whether or not a restoration method is likely to increase marine life associated with MPAs. The framework includes 3 guiding principles, which are that the restoration method has a high likelihood of restoring the integrity of the coastal ecosystem, being successful at a scale that can provide meaningful ecological benefits, and being self-sustaining over a long period with minimal maintenance. Proposed restoration projects will need to demonstrate how the project's outcomes address the recommendations from this report, and a link to the report is available both in the award guidelines and on the Once Through Cooling program's webpage. Okay, here's an overview of the upcoming timeline for the competitive grant program. Stakeholder input on the program's award guidelines is very important to us, and as we create the program. So the draft award guidelines are available now during the 30-day public comment period, which will close on September 14th. We will then take considerable efforts to address these comments as best as we can, and then bring the final award guidelines to the Ocean Protection Council for approval at the October 25th meeting in Santa Cruz, which is also open to the public. And then, pending council approval, we will release an open call for proposals on November 1st for our first round of the competitive awards program. A little over $7.4 million will be available to fund projects in the 4 categories I mentioned earlier. So to summarize, we know that these programs have direct benefits to the effectiveness of MPAs, which is strongly supported in scientific literature. If MPAs are performing at their optimal level, data from around the world and even from our own MPA network strongly support that this directly leads to increases of marine life. OPC is dedicated to a program that uses the best tools at the right locations to invest these funds wisely and to generate the maximum benefit to marine life populations and ocean health. Thank you. I'd be happy to take more questions now.
Yeah, I appreciate the efforts of both of the organizations to strike some balance in terms of the array of investments. And if you were going to visualize a funding pie for the Ocean Protection Council between enforcement, outreach, research and monitoring, long-term monitoring and restoration, is it Are those categories somewhat equivalently funded, or is there a focus? Is the enforcement a little bit higher in the beginning? And how would you characterize the balance of your investments?
Right. So at this moment, that pie is not exactly equal, just because we have only funded 3 of the 4 categories thus far. But we definitely will, take efforts to make sure that these funds are being distributed appropriately based on current needs. Restoration projects sometimes are very expensive. We understand that. Certain, the wireless connectivity on the patrol boats is a expensive upfront cost, but then, as the program goes forward, it may not need as much of an expense in the future. So we definitely will be taking into consideration, distributing these funds as equally as possible, given that some projects are more expensive than others.
Sorry, is there any sort of early stories to tell about monitoring in the MPAs? Because you mentioned the importance of it, and there's an action plan and that sort of thing. But aren't there available data now to suggest that some are successfully meeting certain targets and maybe others have work to do?
Yeah, so we definitely look at the MPA network as a whole. It was designed to be ecologically connected through the state. And we also look at them by region, as I mentioned, south, central, north central, and north. So at this moment, we've collected the baseline data. So that is really the data that we will be comparing in the phase 2 of the long-term monitoring too. So we can't say definitively now that MPAs are increasing marine life for sure, but we can compare the data collected in the future to what we see now, and we are seeing positive trending.
Good. Well, I was a little confused by the key findings of the restoration report that define the impacted areas only going up to Big Sur when we have once-through cooling facilities north of there, for instance, in Monterey Bay. So I'm confused why the impact zone is limited to Big Sur as a northern extent.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Yeah, so the report that Tova mentioned also includes a geographic region specifically for Diablo Canyon, which is the only currently operating once-through cooling facility above, what was the Big Sur? Yeah.
I guess, well, isn't Moss Landing still doing once-through cooling, or no?
Here comes the answer to the
Counselor.
question.
Yes, they are, but recall that they have a combined cycle system, so there's a little bit different math going on there.
Yeah, okay. Well, anyway, I'd like a little bit more information about that, in terms of limiting investment for restoration there in our state when there's other potential impacts, So anyway, I'd like to learn more about that.
Right, and the thing that was interesting, I was trying to do the math, but it wasn't clear. You've got your whole program for MPAs, and then you got the part that's funded by OTC, which is big, but not the whole program by any means.
Right.
Well, yeah, and then I guess I'm really interested in this program, both from as a scuba diver. I've dove in marine protected areas and areas that are commercially harvested, and there's a huge difference. It is like night and day in some areas in terms of the diversity, the health of the kelp forest, and that sort of thing in these protected areas. So I fully expect the data will prove that these protected areas have a significant beneficial ecological impact on our marine resources. It's a hypothesis based on observation. So I'm excited about the program, but also on the other side, I'm an enthusiastic ocean fisher. And, I want to make sure that these recreational opportunities continue and the benefits of the MPAs that feed back to the sustainability of those family building experiences persist into the foreseeable future. So this is a hugely important program to me, and I'm glad to see the connection between our policy and these investments. So thanks for this work.
Thanks. Anything else? Appreciate the report in front of us. I've been following it with Jonathan Bishop, who sits for me on the committee, so I think it's great. That.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for
Thank you.
calendaring it. This is Educational Tuesday today. The Art of the Possible Tuesday, as opposed to the Don't Do Anything month. This is the Art of the Possible Tuesday.
Is it Taco Tuesday?
No, September's about we can do it September, as opposed to don't do anything August. Sorry.
Si se puede, September.
We did adopt the bacteria objectives, though, in August.
We did, but I missed them.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry you weren't here.
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
Yeah, this next item is particularly art of the possible, right?
That's right. Why don't we take our morning break, if you don't mind. You can set up your tags, and let's come back at about 10:55. We're back. My apologies. We're now on item number 6.
Good morning.
Morning.
Morning, board members. I'm Spencer Joplin, the project manager for the Predictive Beach Water Quality Modeling Project with the Division of Financial Assistance. Also in the audience is Rebecca Fitzgerald from the Division of Water Quality, who might be answering a few questions after this. I'd like to give a brief introduction to the project. In 2012, Heal the Bay began modeling concentrations of enterococci at California marine beaches. The State Water Board agreed to pay for this work with a grant through the Proposition 50 Coastal Non-Point Source Pollution Control Program. To date, the State Water Board has provided a total of $1,455,679 for the project, which includes funding for the original scope and 2 subsequent revisions in the scope that I will very briefly discuss. In 2014, the scope was revised to include pilot testing and optimization of the predictive models and the development of guidance for the implementation. In 2015, Heal the Bay presented an informational item to update the board of this work. In 2016, the scope was again revised to develop an automated beach water quality nowcast system for up to 25 beaches. Heal the Bay would like to update the board on this work, which is expected to be completed by March 2019. I would now like to introduce Ryan Searcy, Ali Beam, and Mark Gold for the remainder of this presentation. Thank you.
Good morning.
Morning.
It's nice to be here and update you all on where we're at with this project. So this is our 6th year on this project, and it's been implemented in 3 phases. I'm going to give a brief introduction to the project and background, and then I'll pass it to Ryan to tell you what's going on with phase 3, and then Mark will finish the presentation, Mark Gold. So this project has been a lot of fun. We've been working on this for quite a long time, and you guys have invested heavily in this project, and we're really proud of where we've come with it, and we're really excited to share with you today where we're at. So just a really brief background. We know that concentrations of fecal indicator bacteria in recreational water, swimmers who swim in high levels of it can become ill. That's been shown in epidemiology studies throughout the nation, the world, as well as in California. So for that reason, the state law does require that beaches are monitored for fecal indicator bacteria to protect public health. But there is a small problem with the way that we monitor bacteria concentrations, and that's that it takes 24 hours to get lab results. So this graph here shows a really obvious problem that arises because of that. These are data from Cabrillo Beach in SoCal. Enterococci is on the y-axis in concentrations of MPN per 100 mil. And the black line that's horizontal is the state standard, single sample standard. In AB 411, it's 104 MPN per 100 mil. If concentrations are above that, the beach should be posted as unfit for swimming. If it's beneath that, there's no posting. So you can see at Cabrillo Beach, it's one of the few beaches in California that's sampled daily, or it was sampled daily at the time this data was collected. You can see how the concentrations fluctuate above and below that standard. And there's this really clear instance twice where the concentration was above the standard, and it wasn't till the next day that the beach managers could go out and post a sign saying the beach was unfit for swimming, but by then the water quality was actually improved. So this is not just a problem in California, it's nationwide, it's worldwide. And further, Cabrillo Beach is sampled daily, but 450 beaches in California are only sampled weekly in the dry season. So there is a problem with providing up-to-date, real-time information on beach water quality to the public. As I mentioned, this problem is not just a California problem. So in 2012, when EPA released their new ambient water quality criteria, one of the recommendations in that criteria was that states consider using predictive models to help improve their beach notification programs. So what a predictive model is, it's a really simple statistical model like the one on the slide. It's a linear equation that says enterocoxy concentration equals some linear combination of terms that include environmental metrics that can be easily measured, like water temperature or tide level. The Great Lakes was one of the first regions in the nation to actually use these models for beach management. And they have the USGS there took the lead in that. And they've been using nowcasting of water quality to inform the public of the beach water quality for years now. But at the time that the EPA came out with this recommendation, there was not any work in California to assess whether this was something that could really be a useful tool for California beaches. And that's where you guys came in and funded this project to begin looking to see, is this a viable tool for protecting public health in California?
Can you just help me understand? I mean, I can guess, but I want to make sure I get it right. Is there a difference between a lake even the size of the Great Lakes and our ocean conditions that make it so we would have to do something specific to California?
Absolutely. So our open ocean beaches in California have tides, waves. Those are not found in the Great Lakes. I mean, there are waves, but not of the size that we have in California. So the mixing.
Say there are no surfers in the Great Lake?
I heard that there are. I've seen some pictures, but
not surfing much.
So the mixing conditions are really different. So
salt.
There's salt, yes, salt. So we weren't sure that we could use predictive models at California beaches, where we knew that water quality could vary quite a bit from day to day.
When it comes to the use of those predictive models in the Great Lakes, has there been sort of a result then in fewer illnesses? Since the use of the predictive models, has there been some sort of quantifiable sort of reaction, whether it be the public being better informed and not going in when the conditions are unsafe, et cetera, and any sort of data tied to that?
I think the models there have been really well received by the public, and the USGS and their partners have done a really good job making the information readily digestible by the public. I don't know if Mark's pulling his microphone nearby. Okay. Keeping track of illness is really challenging. These illnesses are not reportable. People don't go to the doctor, so there's no evidence, where we actually can show that there are fewer illnesses, but people are better informed about water quality.
Are they closing the beaches more often?
I don't know in the Great Lakes if they've been posting them more often or not, but they are really, really enthusiastic and use the predictive models all the time in the Great Lakes.
I mean, the situation, which you're going to hear more about, that you don't see as much is, you sample once a week, and then that sign's up there for a whole week, right? And because by using...
Yeah, I think your mic's off.
By using predictive models, then obviously they're getting new information each and every day. And so it's a complete change in the system and how it works, and it's been, as Ali said, very, very well embraced throughout the Great Lakes now for over a decade.
And our beaches are way cooler than Great Lake beaches, so we should be doing something just as cool here in California.
I know. I'm appalled we're not as cool.
One of my good friends is from Erie, and so we've often had we have beaches sort of discussion, but come on, it's a little hard.
Okay, so we are currently in phase 3 of this project. Spencer mentioned 3 phases, and so just really briefly on phase 1, we sought to address the research question: can predictive models provide more accurate information about beach water quality than taking a measurement and using that old measurement to estimate water quality? To do this study, we made 700 models at 25 different beaches all throughout the state, and we published 2 peer-reviewed papers on the project, and we came up with a type of model that we thought would work best at California beaches, and we showed that we could use predictive models at California beaches to predict concentrations of all 3 fecal indicator bacteria: total coliform, fecal coliform, and enterococci. In phase 2, which Spencer mentioned, this was a 1-year project, and it was a pilot project where we partnered with 3 agencies with them to see if we could actually use the models for beach management. So we partnered with County of Los Angeles, Santa Barbara, and Orange County over 1 summer. And when we began phase 2, we weren't sure what the role of the local beach manager would be, if they would be running the models or not. We found that it was really better to have a third party running all the models. And we found that we could interface really well with the current management program in place with all these agencies. So we had really positive results in the pilot study. And it was a low-cost project for the partners that we had. We had great predictions, the models performed well, and the partners enjoyed getting that extra information for the public. And so then we began phase 3, and I'm going to pass it to Ryan now to talk about that.
Great. Thanks, Allie, and thanks to the board for having us here today. Thank you, Spencer, and your team for getting us up here before the board. My name is Ryan SWRCB. I work for Heal the Bay, and I'm the head modeler of the Nowcast team. And I'm going to talk about phase 3, which we were tasked to implement the system full-time and grow it out to be something that is used sustainably into the future. So I want to start by talking a little bit about the technical details behind how we create the models and implement them on a day-to-day basis, and then go into how the public sees this all and our collaboration with the beach agency stakeholders.
I appreciate the indicator species opening slide.
Just to get started, I want to be clear that this is not just a single model that is used over the entirety of the state. It's actually beach specific, and even more so, it's up to three specific models for each FIB type measured at that beach. So it's a system or a series of models. And so when we go to develop a model for a beach, we start with years of historical data. We get our bacterial data from our beach agency partners, and that data is important because that's what we're trying to predict correctly with our models. And that's something that's, as Ali mentioned, really hard for us to measure every single day rapidly. And the other data that we get is environmental data. That's data that's easily attainable, readily available every single day, and known to correlate to bacteria levels. Things like tides, stream flow from a river outlet, waves, weather parameters. So a big bulk of data, historical data for that beach goes into the modeling. And so we apply machine learning algorithms to develop our models. And what we're left with is a model that is not intended to predict the actual concentration of bacteria at the beach, but whether the bacteria concentration is higher or lower than the state's AB 411 thresholds. And we judge the performance of our model by comparing them to the samples that we can get every single week. And so we're able to tune or optimize our models to be able to predict both good water quality days and poor water quality days as best as possible. And so we do this for many beaches in our system, and in order for them to be included in our implemented system, they need to meet a certain rigorous set of performance criteria, again, being able to give us confidence that they can predict good water quality days and poor water quality days on an acceptable level. And so as we do this at the beginning of each season, we're left with a system of predictive models that are based on years of data and that are optimally tuned. The predictions can be thought of as capturing the central tendency of what water quality is given the observed environmental conditions that have occurred throughout that 10-year historical data set. So all of that contributes to really a scientifically robust prediction compared to using a days or weeks old sample to make a beach management decision. And so during the season when we go to implement them, every morning around 7 a.m., we run an automated system that harvests the most up-to-date environmental data from around the web and plugs them into the models that we previously developed. After a manual QA, we release them via email to a set of stakeholders, which includes our beach agency partners and other members of the community, as well as posting it on our Beach Report Card website and mobile app. But really the hallmark of the implementation program is that beachgoers are getting this information every single day of the season, including weekends and holidays. So a quick example, this is data from last year at Cal Beach. Because only 26 samples were taken in the summer period that we were implementing the models there, and we made 150 predictions with our nowcast models, beachgoers got 124 additional predictions or water quality information that they would not have gotten with a sampling program alone. This is our system from last year in 2017. We had 10 beaches in the system, and on average, beachgoers that went to the nowcast beaches got an additional 140 days more water quality information than they would have gotten alone. We published our results from last year in a couple papers, and I'll give them to Spencer to distribute to you all after this.
When it comes to just, I guess, as a percentage of when the models are correct, you know, how accurate are the models sort of running? And can you give that basic percentage or just?
Sure, yeah. Well, in 2017, last year, we found that on average, the models were predicting 50% of the exceedances, whereas the current method, what we call the current method, which is, again, using last week's sample to talk about water quality today, that predicted none of them on average. So it does do a better job, or we saw it do a better job last year at predicting poor water quality days.
I can figure that math out.
Was there a particular beach? Because you know, understanding that each sort of beach or area has different variables. It depends on what the data is. Is there one model or one area that is performing particularly well? Just out of curiosity, when it comes to sort of the accuracy of the modeling predictions.
You know, right now, in our 2018 system, about 85% of our beaches are performing really, really well. So that is meeting that performance criteria that I mentioned earlier, performing on the same level or better than the current method. Specific beaches that perform well, Huntington State Beach did pretty well for us last year. Doheny typically does pretty well. A lot of our Long Beach models do pretty well also.
And in those models, is it because you have better data? You know, is it more sort of granular data that you then have, and it's feeding into a better model, or is there anything, I guess, that you've been able to identify that makes their performance seem to be better than some of the others?
At some beaches, it's really clear what environmental mechanism is actually influencing water quality. We know that rainfall is probably the most likely contributor to poor water quality, but aside from that, tide variables have also been found before to be very important. For example, at Huntington Beach, if we see the tide go above 2 meters, in the historical data, that was really highly correlated to bacterial exceedances. And so those are very strong variables in those models.
Mobilizing something?
Yeah, and there could be a number of reasons why that the tide has an impact on water quality, or waves, or they kind of almost act as proxy towards what's happening with water quality. We don't have a direct, well, at some beaches we do, but I mean, for example, the rainfall itself is not affecting bacteria, but rainfall in an urban area contributes to runoff, and that is what contributes to bacteria levels. Mm-hmm.
Great, thank you.
So yeah, that spring tide cycle where you're scouring upper areas that haven't been scoured and then remobilizing indicator bacteria, that makes sense. It's sort of like a high flow coming from a stream and mobilizing things that are in the flood.
Exactly, and on those tidal periods, if you looked at this map on our website, you'd see a lot of sites actually red because of poor water quality predictions. So this year we're really excited. This year we have our website and app kind of revamped, making it a lot easier for beachgoers to get their nowcast predictions for many beaches. This year we have 19 in our system from Humboldt down to San Diego, and we expect to continue expanding this system more every year, and including adding wintertime predictions for the populations of people that still use the beach during the winter. Here it is listed out. I guess I kind of wanted to take this time to talk a little bit about how we go about selecting our beaches for our system. You know, in the future, we hope to continue to add more and more every year, and we're tasked with adding the most valuable beaches to the system that we can. And so when we go to decide, you know, should a beach be a nowcast beach, we consider a couple different factors, primarily historical water quality, data availability, popularity of the beach, but also support of our beach agency partners. So along the perimeter of this slide, you can see the agencies that we're grateful to work with throughout the last couple of years in this program, and we're happy to have a kind of a close network with them. You know, we deliver daily predictions to them. Each day they help us by collecting sample results and also doing quite a bit of the notification as well. Some beaches post, or some agencies post our predictions on their own media websites, phone hotlines, and some even actually post signs on their beaches as well. So we do value that partnership quite a bit. So before I pass it over to Mark, just wrapping up my part here, you know, Nowcast is not just a bunch of models, it's actually quite a comprehensive program. There's a modeling pipeline that's, you know, consists of an automated modeling process that it makes it really easy for us to add beaches, monitor performance, to do a QA, QC process. There's the public notification and education component. So as we mentioned, we have the website and the app, but we also have a lot of outreach materials, fact sheets, tabling materials, signage. There's the beach manager communication component that I just mentioned, and also quite an extensive technical oversight component composed of a team of experts like Ali and Mark, as well as an external advisory team composed of Steve Weisberg from SWRCB, Donna Francie from USGS, who has really gotten their modeling program off the ground in the Great Lakes, and Dr. Anthony Toe who was also once a researcher at Stanford. So with that, I'll pass it over to Mark.
Thank you.
So just to wrap up, so first of all, I just wanted to give a little historical perspective in that none of this would have been possible without the Clean Beach Initiative, which has really been an extremely successful program from the State Water Resources Control Board. It's nice to see Pat Leahy and Leslie Loudon here, who were absolutely instrumental in making that program a big success and really seeing the importance of this program. So where are we now? And besides giving you an update of some good news, so you don't have to, which is, I know, refreshing for you guys. I guess it's that kind of day today. Is that I want to talk about some of the potential possibilities of further collaboration with the State Water Resources Control Board. Obviously, you have a pretty interesting and successful team here with Heal the Bay and Stanford and UCLA working with the State Water Resources Control Board. The State Water Board more and more has gotten into really expanding their efforts successfully in sharing data with the public in a way that's easily understood. This is obviously the whole purpose of this entire program, is to do that. And so this is really about public health. This is not about regulatory in any way, shape, or form. I think that's a really important thing to note. And it's on a site-specific basis. So it's not a one-size-fits-none sort of approach. It's really taking into account really great specificity and how things change on a day-to-day basis at each and every one of the beaches that we're looking at. Right now, we're at 19 beaches. You know, the potential is for this to be 50-plus beaches statewide, and for every major beach you can think of to have a model. Maybe it's not worth really putting the effort on a model if a beach is a clean beach 98% of the time. That's probably not where the effort needs to be made. But there are still a lot of beaches out there that have a high degree of variability and, tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people visiting it on a regular basis. And so what do I mean by collaboration? Well, as you know, you have your data that you share with the public on a regular basis on a wide variety of different water parameters, whether it's consumption or whether it's number of impaired websites, that was interesting, impaired receiving waters, or the like. There's a wide variety of things that you share with people. For us, collaboration would be an opportunity to sort of get this information out in conjunction, working with you guys with the State Water Board platform, ideally, so it's not just Heal the Bay's platform, it would be with the State Water Board. I think there's a lot of advantages to doing that. It shows that the State Water Board is really in the business of caring about public health. It's not just in the regulatory business. I think that's important to show. I also think from the standpoint of helping us more effectively do this program, by having an official partner with the State Water Board, believe me, the beach managers are going to be much more prompt in providing data on a regular basis at the right time, knowing that the partnership is with the state, that it's not just, oh, here's an environmental nonprofit in Heal the Bay. The urgency to give the data on a regular basis might not be as high as it would be if the partnership was with the state. And that's something that I think is really, really important. The program itself, the cost of the program is relatively modest, believe it or not. I mean, the whole cost probably for getting up to even 50 a year would probably be about 200 grand. And so something to think about from the standpoint of collaboration is the expectation or the ask is nothing like, should the State Water Board fund that, but really should the State Water Board as a partner fund a part of that. And so that's something to just think about, but really what's most important is the collaboration and really growing that. Right now, obviously, none of this would have happened without the State Water Board, but I think where this can really help is really partnership in moving forward in a big, big way. And with that, you see the benefits of Nowcast to beach managers, which more importantly are the benefits to the public. We really want to be able to get the public with information on a daily basis. There's a good chance, that this could even evolve into doing forecasting, not just nowcasting. And so to actually getting to the point of even being able to tell people the night before, maybe what their beach water quality would be the next day, the same way you see on the smog report. I can't promise that, but that's something that obviously our group is looking at very, very seriously. But no matter what, it would be a huge improvement over where we are right now, and something that we look forward to further discussion and moving forward in the future. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you. First and foremost, the notes about how important these sort of collaborative processes are, and not always, and it doesn't have to be in the regulatory frame, although we're regulators, but being able to find partners to continue to, find those opportunities like this, I think is really, really critical. I guess just really quick question, when it comes to the cost, what is the biggest driver on that cost for the program? Is it for the sort of the infrastructure, the software, the technology that you're using, or is it really, sort of the staff time involved with
It's really the person power of doing all the models. As you can tell from Ryan's presentation, is that it's not static. And so to make sure that the models are functioning, there's a lot of re-looking at it over the course of time and calibration that takes into account. Not to mention, you want to make sure that you're keeping up your relationships with your beach managers, which is absolutely critical. This does not work if you're not, hand in glove with the beach managers. And so it really is more personnel than anything else. Ryan's done an amazing job of automating the system to the point, if you would have asked me 3 years ago, could we get to 50 beaches? I'd say you're nuts. But now seeing how much we've been able to accomplish, especially through Ryan and Allie, there's no doubt in my mind we could get up to that and really have a robust statewide program.
Wow.
That's great. And so how, if you would have to estimate, I guess, how many full-time staff currently are sort of working the program, or the equivalent of a full-time position, how many folks are we talking about here that are?
It's about 1.5 PYs. Yeah.
That's very helpful. I appreciate that. Thank you.
I'm seeing a lot of parallel here with our initiative that we started a year or two ago on harmful algal blooms. And it's sort of, we're proving that out ourselves with our Office of Information Management and Analysis and the SWAMP program, kind of doing the heavy lift for the state in terms of getting information, trying to attain some degree of real-time advice. And you may have seen our press releases in advance of Labor Day, which is kind of the highest risk time of the year based on historical information on harmful algae blooms and harmful algal toxins and public health risk associated with it. So have you noticed that effort, and do you see some opportunities for us to use some of those mechanisms?
Well, I sit on the Metropolitan Water District Board, so yes, I am well aware of the work you guys are doing on the cyanobacteria and the concerns there. And it is similar in that regard, in that you're providing the public with real-time information, and so that they can make informed choices. And that's really what this is all about. So much of, believe me, I've appeared before your board 100+ times over the years, and so much of what we always talk about is in the regulatory framework. And this is really a case where, where you're really focusing on the public health side of the equation of what your responsibility is, just like you do on the algal blooms. And solutions are more complex and cost a lot more money, but one thing you can do in the interim is protect public health, and to put that front and center is absolutely critical.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. I think, being involved in this and seeing Ryan give presentations over the years, and we're trying to emphasize that utility to the public, that their health is best protected with information that's good information, high data quality, corroborated, science-based, but timely. And not unlike, as you said, there's the smog reports or even the weather reports. I have on my iPhone, I can check the tide, so I know if it's dangerous to go out on my kayak when the currents would be strong where I go. And that's really the goal here, is to have something that people can refer to. You referred to the Nowcast, which is, okay, today, how does it look? I can look it up. I have an app for that. And it doesn't seem like a huge jump to me to go to a forecast. If you're gaining confidence on Nowcast, can't you use the wealth of data that has gone into that, and then turn around and statistically predict based on thousands and millions of data points the next day?
We think so, and we just submitted a proposal to Sea Grant, and to see if we can do forecasting, and we'll see if it's funded.
It just seems like a very similar approach. It's just a bit of a time step.
Right.
Change.
Exactly.
You're still dealing with tide cycles.
Absolutely, the next step in the evolution of the program. I mean, it's come so far in a few short years, but that one would be groundbreaking if we could do that.
So, and then we talked a little bit about cost. What does it take to get it going? And you mentioned, okay, this is not regulatory, this is communication. I get all that. And yet, I will remind folks of the utility of regulatory requirements to fund information dissemination to the public. So there is a role for regulatory to help fund a meaningful communication, science-based communication to the public for them to protect their health. So it's not a matter of taking the data or the predictive data and making an enforcement action or a permit requirement or a threshold of having to do action items. It's more a path to compliance approach, that if you are funding an effective communication predictive system for the public that they can access, you are meeting a requirement of your discharge permit.
Excellent point.
So anyway, that's an effective way of protecting public health is to involve the public, you know, and to make sure that they trust the information that they're receiving. So that's the importance of the science-based approach. So it's very promising. Thanks for the good news that you do see a future not too distant where we can have this real-time information for the public for the majority of the beaches in our state.
It's obviously a dream come true for me. How many years we've been talking about this sort of thing?
Quite a few.
Started my career on this. So thank you for all your hard work. I appreciated the detail too, which is takes a lot of, you made it look simple, but I know it took a lot of hard work to try and figure out what the right variables are and the
Don't you like when really smart people say, oh, it's just a simple mathematical equation, you know?
No, folks might wonder why it's taken so long, and it's this combination of technology, data, and creativity and talent on the part of people who come together. So this is quite a dream team that you've pulled together, and I really appreciate the methodical way you've gone about it. It's interesting because so much of what we do is either in that enforcement realm, which is important, and we don't get to do as much of it as we should, but also in this highly hyper-technical and hard-fought regulatory regime. And the thing I like about this is working on something that regular people actually want, and that regular people have assumed for decades that somebody must know. And so the idea of doing all this hard work to come at something that a common sense person that my Aunt Charlotte would think we should have done years ago is something that makes me happy. And so we should just get together and think about what it is that we can do to foster more of this. I don't know the right word to use, but also we have been working on transparency of data in so many of our fora precisely because transparency is such an important thing. With all the caveats, I'm sure the website has all kinds of caveats on it that allows you to go someplace we don't get to go in an enforcement action or somewhere else. And the public, you know, duly informed, I can see would want a forecast or something that says, okay, there's a 50% chance of this, take your chances, up to you, full, you know, public information, and then people are adults and they can make their choices, as opposed to it always having to be about who closes a beach or who doesn't. So I just think there are so many ways in which this is good, and I appreciate the partnership and also all the hard work behind it, which I can just imagine.
Well, thank you. And just to wrap up, it is that this is really a case for the state. We're looking at transparency on everything from, you know, beach report card from Heel to Bay, Clean Beach Initiative, Nowcast, and looking at the water quality at our beaches during the summer times, not so much during winter. We haven't cracked that nut quite yet, but during the summertime, the water quality is so much better at our beaches than how it was 15 years ago. And a lot of that really has to do with getting the information out in a way where, you know, decision makers are saying, okay, we need to invest in that way, and the state was there to help co-invest. And so it really is one of the great success stories for water quality in the state in the last couple of decades.
Yeah, you know, you see that in conservation as well, where, you know, you inform the public, you create a feedback loop, then you see things happen. You know, if you're aware that your beach is unclean and there's, you know, a number of days where it's exceeding, you're going to ask somebody about it, right? There's going to be public attention, and absent that, you know, there's not you need to be able to, the public needs to be able to be informed in order to be able to even know what to ask or, you know, where we're necessarily going. And I think, you know, one of the important parts in some of this is definitely that it doesn't take a lot of dollars. That, you know, we are at this unique sort of moment where there is a creativity there, the technology is there, certainly, you know, the information is there in bits and pieces, but it's really about a willingness about multiple stakeholders coming together in order to, you know, make this sort of work happen. And it doesn't have to be, you know, sky-high dollars. With a little bit of funding, you do some really incredible work. So I really appreciate all this that you've been able to pull together, and glad that we're partners in that.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you all very much for the great work, and Mark, for your years of vision on it, even though you look like you're still a child.
Thank you.
That was supposed to be a compliment, sort of, but it didn't come out right. And thank you, Spencer, very much for all the work.
Good to see you.
Well, that was nice. All right. Lucky number 7, item number 7. Any takers? I know where I've been. I've been sitting right here, all but I think 2 days of the past month, let alone the past 2 weeks, so.
Yeah.
Anything, you don't have to report, anything worth reporting?
No, I think it was just a lot of meetings and briefings, but no sort of bigger events to really. I'm good.
Anything?
I
Have a
did.
lot next
Next couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did attend the San Francisco Bay Regional Board meeting last month, and they had a gathering where all the board members and a lot of the staff got together to brainstorm on the issue of climate change and, and from their regional board's perspective, how the climate change factors interact with specific programs, and including the landfills and near the bay and all these other factors. So it was a good experience to sit down at one of the tables with one of the board members and staff and just ask questions and give examples of, and it was led by and facilitated by one of the board members, Jane Batty from Half Moon Bay.
Great.
And she did a great job. And so it was nice to see that on at that level. And then we'll see all 9 regions discuss climate change in their programs at the Water Quality Coordinating Committee on Wednesday, October 25th, I think. Well, it's the Wednesday.
That'll be great.
That whole morning, all 9 regions are going to talk about examples that could be at the local level or the region-wide level, and we'll hear about issues in the montane regions and the coastal regions, and getting in the spirit of things with the Global Climate Summit coming up next week. It will be focus of discussion there.
That's fantastic.
Yep.
The only thing I'll flag is next week is the Governor's Global Climate Summit and the accompanying water pavilion and miscellaneous events. I'm going to be speaking at a public policy California drought and
drought report that PPIC is coming out.
yes, right. I think it's yes. And that's Monday. Sorry, there's a lot going on, and I think it may be droughts and wet.
Yes, drought
yeah.
and floods. Yeah.
And then early next week, I suspect some of us, I know I'll be, and a number of our staff will be over at the biannual Delta Science Conference, and it's one of those things that's chock full of science and people we've seen in front of us and people we haven't seen in front of us. And if you do get a chance to go, I highly recommend it. Some of it's hard to understand if you're not already a scientist, because it's scientists talking to scientists most of the time, except for the first set of morning plenaries. But it's always really important and mind expanding, and just the sheer number of scientists and policymakers working on Bay Delta is quite a sight to see when we tend to see a smaller slice of it in front of us or in some of our partner agencies, but there's actually quite a bit going on, so I highly recommend that. All right, with that, we have, we're going to adjourn to closed session. I don't believe we have a water fix closed session.
That's correct. The only closed session item will be the personnel closed
The
session
personnel item. So do you want to grab some food and meet at noon? Okay, we will do that. We will recess to there, and then someone will come back out here to adjourn. Thank you all. That was a good morning. Thanks.